Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. Joe Schober is, as far as I can tell, the longest-serving employee of America Online. He joined America Online shortly after their IPO in 1992, and he left America Online shortly before Verizon bought them. And so today we're going to get basically the entire history of the modern version of America Online, from the very earliest days when they were the scrappy underdog against CompuServe and Prodigy, to the growth and explosion around the time that the web took off. We're going to talk about the chat rooms, about the AOL Instant Messenger product. We're going to talk about the AOL Time Warner merger. Please enjoy this great conversation with Joe Schober. Joe Schober, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So I want to start out with the, not exactly nerd bona fides, but sort of the early tech background, and try to find out your early experiences online, which I'm assuming were probably with BBSs?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Just to give some even further back than that background about myself, my house, I'm an only child. My parents brought in an Apple II back in, I believe it was 1978. I was 5 or 6, coming up on that age. And I got completely addicted to it pretty much instantaneously. Taught myself AppleSoft Basic early on, and then 6502 assembler, and then Pascal and Logo, and kind of went through the whole thing. I got, as I say, completely enamored in computer stuff. And wrote a lot of programs kind of for my own benefit, and got the magazines and all that good stuff. Went to the library, read every book I could find at the library about computer science. And then, yeah, that's, as I said, that was in the late 70s. And then skip ahead a few years to the mid 80s. I'm going to say probably circa 84 or something like that. Found about modems. And I think somewhat pestered my parents into investing in one. I'm not sure they knew exactly what it was or what it would be or how much trouble I could get into with it, but we did get one. And as you say, yeah, then I got into the world of BBSing back then.
Here's an actual bona fide you can give us. What sort of baud, like 300 or like what are you
First
doing?
one was 300 baud modem, exactly. And in fact that was an era where you would still find some BBSs that would only support 110 baud, which, very easy to just watch the characters stream across one by one.
So we've actually been talking about BBSs a lot lately, but even at the risk of repeating ourselves a little bit, let's just describe these are local computers that you can, someone else's computer you can dial into, and they share their files. You can do rudimentary messaging back and forth, that sort of thing, right?
Right, exactly, that sort of thing. I mean, much like you see around the internet these days, you would usually have private messaging, whether it was called email or direct message or whatever. You'd have public forums or posts or bulletin boards, whatever you call it, file sharing, usually some games, things like that. They were, for the most part, certainly in that era, you'd find that they were on single line systems. So it was a single phone line on the BBS side, the server side in modern lingo, that would answer the phone and would just serve a single user at a time, which anyone who was familiar with the era would know as users of the more popular bulletin boards, you would set your computer to dial in on auto redial because you'd often get a busy signal.
War
There's a
dialing,
lot
yeah.
of yeah, exactly. You'd war dial it, so you would just leave it dialing for minutes or hours sometimes. And it was kind of funny. It was almost like a lottery luck of the draw thing, because when the previous caller hung up, there might be 10 people all trying to reach that BBS at that time, and it just became luck of the draw if you were the lucky one to actually make it through and then get a ring back and connect to the system.
And so how deep into BBSs do you go? Do you eventually run one yourself, or are you just always a user?
Ran one myself. In fact, I went far enough. I wrote completely from scratch my own BBS software for the Apple II. Wrote it from scratch. I ended up actually selling it later on. Sold a couple dozen copies. It wasn't a huge enterprise or anything, but there were other people using it.
What was the name of the software?
It was eBBS. This was in the innovative time when you just put a letter before BBS, and that was the name.
Hey, it works. It still works for Apple today.
Exactly. It's iPhone, iPad. What was interesting was that was around the time, I was still perusing the library all the time, and I started learning about the internet, which at that time was not even the internet really as you know it today. There were these kind of disparate networks. You had your BitNet and your UUNet interfaces and so forth. So it wasn't quite as uniform and standardized as what we have today. But in that era, you had the ability to email other people if you knew their address, of course. There were Usenet news groups, which still exist today. So I got fascinated by that and ended up writing into my BBS software the capability to participate in internet activities. So these little Apple II systems now were joined on to what was the internet at the time and could participate in Usenet news group discussions, could send email and so forth. So it was actually in addition to just the user experience of suddenly having all these worlds of information and connectivity open to you for my technical career, or what was going to become a technical career, it was great exposure because you have to become familiar with all the protocols and the ways that the rest of the world did things.
Before I actually, so it's only BBSs. Or are you also on like early online services like CompuServe or The Source or anything like that?
I did have a CompuServe account fairly early. That was back in the days. Again, to put it in a little bit of context, at this point I was a youngish teenager, so I certainly did not have a lot of disposable funding. And I don't remember the exact rate for a CompuServe account, but they billed you by the minute. I forget if it was $10 an hour or something like that, billed minutely. So any use I had of CompuServe was sort of a kind of hit and run. I would pop on for a few minutes, kind of with a game plan. It's like, okay, I'm going to grab this file, I'm going to look up this thing, and then I'm going to sign off or send this email, whatever. It had to be very targeted missions. So you didn't have the same experience of browsing the network as you would when you're on a unlimited unlimited time, unlimited billing sort of situation.
Well, as you mentioned, though, you're a Mac guy, probably almost exclusively. So I believe that our path to AOL begins with Apple Link in around 1988. So first of all, tell us what Apple Link was, and then tell us how you got involved with Apple Link.
Sure. Yeah, you're exactly right about Apple Link. So the company that eventually became AOL at that time was known as Quantum Computer Services, and it was actually a pivot, I guess you would call it, of an even earlier company called Control Video. Their original game plan was to basically rent video games for console video game systems like the Atari, for example. You would be able to plug in this kind of special cartridge that could connect over a modem, download a game, which you would rent for $1 a day or whatever the deal was. I don't remember that kind of detail, and then rent games. That business, for whatever reasons, didn't really succeed, and it ended up morphing into this other company, Quantum Computer Services, which decided to build an online service called Quantum Link for users of Commodore 64 computers. And they had this is somewhat before my time. Again, I was probably
Right.
12 at this time.
Right.
But I know enough about the history. They actually had a partnership, very smart partnership with CompuServe, or sorry, with Commodore, one of those C words, where they did bundles in with the boxes. So, everyone had the opportunity who had a computer to get the Quantum Link software, the Q-Link software, and get online. So they built somewhat of a community up. But again, in that time, modems were not standard accessories with computers. There was still that hourly charge involved to get online. So, it built up. They certainly had a respectable membership base for the time. But, it certainly wasn't like being on the internet today. Couple years later, I think circa 87, something like that, they decided to do a similar partnership with Apple Computer. Apple did have a limited online service that they called Apple Link, which was actually like their developer support system. So it was basically just a glorified BBS, kind of a large-scale BBS almost, that they would use, where developers could contact Apple Developer Support, basically get technical support when building software for the Apple II or for the Macintosh. But Apple contacted Quantum and wanted to do a similar thing for Apple computers for consumer use. And that ended up getting eventually called Apple Link Personal Edition to differentiate it from Apple Link Developer Edition, I guess. And it was never called that. It was just called Apple Link historically. But so, yeah, you're exactly right. So I was actually brought on by a friend through the BBSing world who had been selected to be one of the original forum leaders on Apple Link Personal Edition. And this was the time when the service was still in beta. And he contacted me and he's like, I can't talk to you in detail about what it is until you sign an NDA, but I'm being associated with this thing that I think you're going to love. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. Sure, whatever. And exactly. So I got on the beta test list for what at the time was called Samuel. That was the code name of Apple Link Personal Edition. Got on that in March of 1988. And so, I mean, to this day, I actually still have that same account. 20, almost 30 years old, I guess, at this point.
So, as a beta tester, you're not being charged by the hour, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Yeah, all the beta testers got online for free, and at that point, I kind of knew they'd said at the time. I'm pretty sure I remember the date was July 15th was when the beta test was going to end, and all the billing was going to start. And so I was kind of like, what am I going to do after July 15th? Because it really was at that time. It was a completely different experience. I was very accustomed to BBSing on these single line systems, and I'd had those little brief hit and run experiences on CompuServe. But as I said before, it's a very different experience when you can just stay around and enjoy it. You can actually talk to other people in real time, via instant message or via chat room, and you're not worrying about the clock. You're not worrying about, how many dollars is this going to cost me to do this? You're just enjoying the experience, and it was addicting to say the least. So I tried to find ways to make myself useful. I eventually, before the beta clock ended, joined as basically a community volunteer, helping run different forums and things like that around the service. But that was enough to net me an overhead account, which is the internal phrasing for free account. And that was a wonderful thing at that time.
Before we try to move forward to AOL, just briefly for a second, so they already have message rooms, even at this early stage, where you can get a bunch of strangers in a room and they can all talk to each other in real time?
Yeah, that's correct. They had chat rooms at the time. Back then, there were actually two kinds of chat rooms. There were normal chat rooms, which could have up to 23 people at a time, And they also had what they called the auditorium, which could handle hundreds or thousands of simultaneous users. But the experience was a little bit different in that the idea of the auditorium was like being in a real physical auditorium where you would have a speaker, a featured speaker up on quote unquote stage, and possibly with a moderator or two, and they could broadcast out to everyone. All the other participants, the audience, you would get put in, I think they called them rows, which was kind of like a mini chat room. So there might be 20 people in a row or something like that. You could converse amongst your row, and you could hear the people on stage, but you couldn't readily converse with people in other rows.
You know what that reminds me of, obviously, is, the Reddit Ask Me Anythings, except that actually sounds a little more sophisticated.
Yeah, it actually worked really well. I'm blanking right now. I wish I'd thought back on this. I know kind of in the heyday of AOL, kind of right before things switched over to the internet, being more mainstream, they had some guests in the auditorium with like thousands of audience members, like, high profile real celebrities who would come and just kind of talk. But yeah, it was pretty neat technology, certainly for the time. All
right, so one more question on that. So that was that auditorium that you're describing, but then the other rooms, are they arranged by topic, or are they like user created? How did that work?
Yeah, all of the above. There were. It was kind of interesting. Where the system would tend to drop you in right when you logged in was a place called People Connection, and you would just get dropped into a room called Lobby, sensibly enough. And as the service got bigger, it would be Lobby 1, Lobby 2, Lobby 491, whatever. But it was just a lobby, and it was just kind of hi, welcome, say hi to whoever happens to be here. But users could form public rooms just by topic. Just say create a name, create a room of which name. You type in a name, and you would now show up on a list of public rooms that people could join or not as they wished. You also had the opportunity to have private rooms, which would be just a group chat sort of thing. But you had to know the name; it wouldn't show up on a list. And then in addition to all that, there were lots of community areas. The technical ones tended to be the more visited ones, so Apple II, graphics and sound and utilities and gaming and things like that. Same thing for the Macintosh. Same thing later for the PC side of things. So those you would usually have weekly or bi-weekly chats. Every Wednesday at 9 p.m. we'll have another discussion. People would come join those. There were also lots of other community areas with similar kind of scheduled events. In fact, at that time, it was kind of a neat feature in hindsight. When you were logged into the service, there would be these banners. What they looked like kind of depended on your specific client software, but maybe at 8:55, a banner would scroll across your screen saying, "Hey, we're going to be talking about," this is not chronologically correct, but we're going to be talking about the latest news in the World of Warcraft universe. Come into the PC gaming room at 9 p.m. So there would be these like little advertisements for different upcoming events, and it gave you as a user a menu. Well, that actually sounds really interesting to me, and you make your way over to that chat room and get settled in for the 9 o'clock start. So they had kind of that scheduled programming, and the community leaders throughout the service were kind of tasked with doing that. Coming up with your schedule of interview guests or just open topics or whatever it is, and you make your calendar weeks ahead of time, and it would all get scheduled in the system and appropriately advertised and such. It was a nice environment and made it really easy to find things that were of interest to you.
Well, and what's interesting to me is, as someone that, remembers AOL from like 93, 94, like that is still functionally how, so like the structure was there in 1988, because I can remember you get dumped into a lobby and there was the People Connection and things like that. So functionally in 1988, everything that I remember from the AOL chat rooms are already there.
Right, yeah, and actually I think most of that even is earlier. It was derived from the Quantum Link service. So really in the mid-'80s, I think a lot of that technology was already in place.
Okay, so in the interest of jumping us forward,
we'll be here all night.
Yeah, take me to from there, you're a kid that's a beta tester to, in 1992, I believe it is, you become a full-time employee at what is now AOL. So how, take me from A to B, how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? So how that really kind of happened was I was very interested in the technology they were using. So I started reverse engineering the client, which I'm pretty sure the terms of service that I probably did not read was specifically said I was not supposed to do. Never did it maliciously, and I was never a black hat type of hacker. I was always a white hat. I mostly just wanted to see how the thing worked because I found it fascinating. So I started reverse engineering a little bit. I kind of had my own private disassembly of the code. Then, of course, because it's hard to avoid, started making some tweaks to it. And somewhere along the line, started kind of getting on the radar of the technology teams over there at Quantum Computer Services. In fact, one of the kind of development manager, I guess was his title, a guy by the name of Bill Pitlavani. He's actually fairly well known in the early days internet community. Mm-hmm. He was very active on the service. I mean, he was Bill P. Everyone knew he worked for the company. Really nice guy and all. But he would tag me an email or instant message sometimes like, "What are you doing? I just saw some long message that had your name attached to it on the server side, and I don't know what you're doing, but don't break it." But I got more and more involved, and I actually started producing mod kits that I would distribute that would patch the client software in real time and add new capabilities to it. I just started publishing this.
Publishing on AOL itself or outside?
Publishing on AOL itself,
okay,
right.
Yeah.
I wasn't even too surreptitious about it. Got to know the people. It turns out in what was probably one of the more lucky coincidences of my life that Quantum Computer Services was based about 10 minutes away from where I lived. They were in Vienna, Virginia. I lived just a couple towns over. So I actually ended up becoming personally friendly with the people in the company. When I started releasing these mod kits, I think at first they freaked out a little bit. Like, what is this? What is he doing to my software? Eventually, I think they realized, well, these were actually some neat products I was putting out. And they're like, okay, you can do it as long as you put it through our QA department. I'm like, sure, I'm fine. We'll do that. And so these things actually got officially QA'd. So I became familiar with some of the QA team. And they let me do my thing. Until I turned 18, that was about the extent of it. Once I was of 18 and of legal age, almost immediately I became a contracted forum leader on the service. I also ended up getting contract work with them. They were looking to do some operating system related updates to the Apple II client software. The whole company at that point had kind of moved on from the Apple II. Like the software was literally archived off on tape. I had to drag the source code back out on tape and figure out how to get it to me. That actually turned out to be kind of a dead-end project because they originally cross-compiled or cross-assembled, it was all assembler code, the code on Stratus mini computers, which is what they used internally on the host side, which I didn't have access to. It kind of didn't end up really working out the way I wanted because they needed to be able to like exactly reproduce the binary of what they'd released. I couldn't really do that. It didn't work out. It did get me, which at the time was kind of a holy grail. It got me the source code to the client software. So that thing I had been reverse engineering for the previous several years. But at this point, it's kind of like there's obviously a link of trust built between myself and the company. And so, as you said, in May of 1992, I had just finished a spring semester in college, and I went to the vice president of development at that time. I just walked into his office. I'm like, "Do you need any other full-time engineers?" And he said, "Sure, that sounds great." And that was more or less my entire interview at AOL. It was slightly longer than that, and a little bit more involved, but really not much more. I mean, I didn't even have a resume or anything. But at this point, they knew me already for
right, yeah.
a year or two. Yeah, right. And they knew I was very familiar with the underpinnings of the system, and I was a decent guy. I wasn't going to screw up anything, at least not on purpose. So yeah, I started in May of 1992 at AOL,
and
which was about 3 months after their IPO.
After their IPO, yeah, in '92.
Yep.
So what's your job title? Like, what are you working on? Like, what do they have you do? Like, what's the project?
So I joined. I think my title was just like programmer or programmer analyst, something like that. I joined the Windows client software team. At this point, Windows, the prevalent version was 3.0. If you've ever used that,
right,
that's ugly. But the company did not have Windows client software out at that point. They had a PC, a GEOS-based product called PC Link, but nothing for the Windows environment. And so I joined the Windows team. I think the internally listed version number of the client at that point was like 0.5. So it came up, it could connect to the service, it could do basic stuff, but there was still a lot of work to be done, and pretty much across the board. When I joined, actually the first task they gave me was automated testing. So there was a visual test platform that Microsoft had at the time, and they wanted to have automated test coverage of the entire client. Okay, yeah, no problem. And that actually ended up by the time I was done with it, it was something like a 45-minute or so test suite. It ran through and exercised pretty nearly every feature of the client and gave a scorecard of how everything was working at the end. So we ended up using that every time there were new client builds. We'd run it through the test suite and make sure we hadn't broken anything. Did a good regression test of the entire platform. Frankly, I think that was probably a introductory project to make sure I could settle into the environment and get familiar with it without breaking any of the core code. Within a couple months, I was working on the core code. The entire client team at that point was, I guess, about 5 people. And so I kind of jumped right in, and it was it was completely a startup environment at that point.
That's exactly it was going to be my next question. So you're describing, first of all, the entire client team for Windows is 5 people.
Yeah.
Okay, so
for the client side, yeah,
right,
there were back-end developers as well. Yeah.
So, yeah, just give us a general sort of like macro description of AOL as a company at this point. They've just IPO'd, so what are they like? It's like a startup, you said.
Yeah, it's a lot like a startup. It's I don't have an exact number for you, I think, but I was approximately like employee 100, something like that. Of those, call it 100 for the sake of discussion, 100 people, I would say about 50% of them were in the call center. So they were on site actually taking the support calls from customers who couldn't connect or had billing questions or what have you. And the remaining 50 or so people were spread up. You had the Windows client team, you had the Macintosh client team, you had some host developers, server developers. You had quite a few people in content creation, because at that point, you have to remember, a lot of companies did not publish on the internet. There were some, it was more kind of a curated sort of thing. So you'd actually have to go out and talk to World Book or, Encyclopedia Britannica or Sabre for travel services or whatever the weather provider was. You had to go out and kind of individually curate all of those feeds and usually do all sorts of crazy bridging or something to get that content onto the service. So there were a lot of content people who did that.
We should point out that, again, this is slightly before or at the same time that the web is taking off. So you're not writing on web standards, you're using your own proprietary system to publish this stuff, right?
That's exactly right. And even to provide a little bit more of background for it, the proprietary language that was used prior to the Windows client, so on the original Apple II, on Quantum Link, Apple II, Macintosh, and PC Link, was an older version of the proprietary language called FDO 88, 88 being the year. The Windows client was the first one to use a next generation version called FDO 91, which turned out to be next generation enough. It survives to this day, 25 years later. So not only was there this brand new client on this brand new operating system they hadn't used, but all of the content of the service and all of the back-end support infrastructure had to be also simultaneously updated to use this new protocol, which was also being developed on the fly. So all the parts were moving all at the same time, and it's some just utter miracle that everyone managed to get synced up and aligned in such a way that all these pieces actually fell together and worked at the same time.
So these are going to be a series of sort of, now we're again stepping you into the macro questions, which you can speak to from your perspective, or say, Brian, I can't really speak to that or whatever. But
Sure.
What is the vision that is articulated to you of what AOL is going to become, or is trying to become? Like, what is it that you're told this is what we're trying to do?
Yeah, I'm probably going to have a little bit of revisionist history here, because this is long enough ago that some of the time frames start getting blurry. But Steve Case had a very clear vision that he always conveyed to all the employees, whether he was talking to you one-on-one in a meeting or kind of an all hands in the auditorium or whatever. Of it being about content and community, and there was a third C at that time. It ended up, I think, morphing into like 5 Cs. It was like content, commerce,
Right.
community, context, and something.
I've seen those C's pop up in my research. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it made for Steve. I don't know if you've had the privilege of talking.
Not
to him,
yet.
but
We're working on it.
he's very visionary, and he's very good at conveying his image of what he's thinking about. And at the time, we were certainly eyeing the competition, right? You mentioned we talked about CompuServe before, which was CompuServe was actually created like so early. It was like 1970 or something.
Right,
It's actually
68.
a little bit insane. 68, yeah.
I've had the CompuServe founder on. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I saw that on your site. So CompuServe had been around forever, and it had a very kind of technical, very computer nerdy kind of atmosphere to it. There was Genie, there was the Source. Those were other similar online services
Prodigy.
at the time. Well, yeah. So I was leaving that one. I was personally kind of worried about Prodigy, for a couple reasons. One was they were backed by big companies. They were backed by IBM and by Sears, and they had these big names. And they also were, from the ground up, unlike those other services, had this graphical front end on it. But they did have kind of a different take on it too, which was it was more about selling you stuff. There were a lot of Prodigy was kind of a lot about selling you things
And ads at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, exactly like that. And by comparison, Steve always pushed, the community aspects of it, and it even came down to a lot of the subtle details, like, they weren't, subscribers or whatever, they were our users. Everything was kind of meant to just be friendly and more personal, and not be computery and not be off-putting. This was supposed to be a service that your mom could sign up for and use and be comfortable with.
So there's a real conscious focus on mainstreaming it, on it
Yes.
not just being for computer nerds.
Exactly, not for being for computer nerds. One of these other subtle details that actually, for reasons we could go into, but like when I started testing Apple Inc. Personal Edition, there were no passwords, because I think that was considered to be too computery or whatever. It doesn't mean there wasn't security. Your disk actually had basically a custom password that got changed every time you signed on, just a secret code or whatever. But you didn't have to know it. It was just associated with your software. But it made it easier to sign on. And yeah, everything was kind of with the focus of, this is not intended for technical users. This is intended for the casual computer user, or not even, computer almost wasn't part of the term. We were always targeting people who were not computer users. They just happened to be using a computer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Just another one of those random examples was when we shipped the Windows software. We knew people, if you can believe it in this day and age, didn't even know how to use a mouse.
Right.
So the icon, it didn't just say, AOL or whatever. It said AOL - double click to start, which is kind of a crazy name for your application. But it told people what to do, right?
Well,
and,
I had Jan Brandt on, and she described those tests where people would try to use the mouse as sort of like a sewing machine pedal or whatever.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
On many occasions, and I actually listened to your interview with Jan, and I had my own share of time in some of the user survey rooms where we're behind a one-way mirror watching. As people just off the street are trying out different test forms, tests, clients, whatever that we had, and they would do things like that, and we're behind the one-way glass trying not to yell at them like, "What are you doing? Don't pick up the mouse and use it like a laser pointer. It doesn't work." But I mean, that wasn't fair of us because it's this device you've never seen before. It's just this plastic box sitting on the table. How are you supposed to know what you do with it? Right. So, and that was always the mentality we tried to have with everything we did was these people have never been on the internet before. They haven't been on a BBS before. They've barely used a computer in any form. And we need to make the environment comfortable for them.
Well, and that reminds me of, the famous example that the, not your screen name, but your username on CompuServe was a string of numbers.
The numbers with a comma, right?
Right, yeah. Whereas AOL allows you to choose and personalize who you are on the service, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, and that was pervasive throughout. And we were talking earlier about people connection and dropping into the lobby. I think, Steve, especially as the leader of this, understood that the connection between people was going to be by far the stickiest and most valuable attribute of online connectivity for people in the long run. Yeah, it's great you can buy a plane ticket. It's great you can look up something in the encyclopedia, but that's not world changing. I mean, I can call a travel agent. I can go to the encyclopedia in the library. What is world changing is being able to talk with people of similar interests around the country or around the world. That you just couldn't really do that before in a practical way.
Well, that's so interesting that you say that because, early AOL spends so much time and so much money, lining up deals with, Time Warner and this one and that one to provide this brand name content and things with Sabre so that you can do, buy a ticket on. You're right.
Yep.
But are they just doing that because they feel like they need that as a prestige to get people in the door? But then they know on the back end that it's just the people interacting. That's the real juice.
Well, I think you need both, right? Because it's difficult to sell a service and say, hey, pay us $6 an hour to come and talk to random people. If you just look at that objectively from a marketing point of view, and I don't pretend to be a marketeer by any means, you talked to Jan already, but that's a tough sell. I mean, it's easier to have objective things that people can say, oh yeah, it would be cool if I didn't have to drive down the street to the library. I could just look it up in an encyclopedia article. So I think part of it is you have to kind of glom onto people with concepts they're familiar with and tell them how you're going to make that stuff easier or better for them, because that's a very objective thing that's easy to think about and say, oh yeah, I do that today, but you can make it faster and easier for me. Cool, that's neat. That's very different from kind of the more abstract, certainly at the time, concept of I'm going to talk to random people around the world. That's just such a strange concept. Today we do it all the time, but right. in that era, just going to just chat with people about something you're interested in, it just wasn't something people knew about. So it's very hard to rope them in because they didn't have any frame of reference around that.
Well, let's talk about that. If that is the secret sauce, the interaction of people, that in the end, all we really want to do with any of these devices, all the way down through Snapchat and their IPO today, is just talk to each other. Okay, so it's these chat rooms that is AOL's secret sauce, and
Part of it, certainly.
Okay. Okay, so actually quantify that for me. Like, from internally, how much do you guys feel that it is your secret sauce that, like, well, this is what everybody's doing? Again, I'm not asking you for exact numbers, but how much do you feel like this is our product that we really have to concentrate on, is these chat rooms and keeping this going?
I mean, certainly the chat rooms were a big part of it. Having that environment where people could come together and socialize with one another and form those personal relationships. And now you associate those relationships with AOL. Even email, because at that time, people didn't have email.
Right.
For the most part, if you wanted to talk even non-real time, the average person did not go onto a BBS, certainly did not go onto CompuServe or something. So email at that time was a revolutionary concept. We had instant messages, which work as they do today with, if you still use AIM or, text messages basically, right? Where you can one-to-one communicate instantly with people. There's probably a good argument that circa 1994, I think it was, when the buddy list was introduced, which was just providing presence. Here's the list of all the people who are on the service right now that and suddenly it's kind of like this community. It's like, oh, hey, Bob's here and Bill's here and Lisa's here. Oh yeah, hey, Lisa's here, I wanted to ask her something, and you just double click and it starts becoming part of your life, that social aspect of your life. And yes, humans are very social creatures, so we like to interact. I mean, that's very ingrained in all of us. That there's no question in my mind. That was a huge part of it. A big part of it was the emphasis on making the software not be for technical users.
How much of it also was, I've read that maybe strategically, like, focusing on Windows, because like you guys were almost known as like the service that like sort of rode Windows. Was as Windows 95 comes out and like as Windows takes over the world, how important was that you guys were super tied to that?
I mean, I think it was absolutely instrumental. So much of the AOL success story, I think, was a matter of kind of being at the right place at the right time with the right product offering, and then just a little sprinkle of just dumb luck that everything, falls into the right place. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. When the Windows client software debuted at the Windows OS 2 conference out in San Jose in January of 1993, and we cut it so close to the wire. I know this personally. At that time, I was had progressed up to being the build master, and the final GM build of the Windows 1.0 software was done Friday evening. I can't tell you the exact date, but it was done on a Friday evening. We were getting on a plane on Saturday to San Jose to get set up for the Windows OS 2 conference, which was going to start on Monday morning. But we were so late with the software, they didn't have enough time there with the weekend and all to actually get mass-produced discs. So they handed us, there was a crew at the Vienna office who basically hand duplicated like 500 or something floppy disks with the software. We got the little cardboard mailers like you've probably seen and all the little new user certificates. And at the hotel in San Jose, we had a little assembly line. We had some snacks and drinks. And we handmade the first 1,000 startup kits of the Windows software. It was a great fun. And then a day later, the whatever production company came and dumped another 5,000 on us, and we were set for the show. But yes, that was a big change because there was this kind of convergence of several things that happened in the computer industry around then. Computers started getting much cheaper. They like that Apple II I got originally was, probably $2,000, $2,500 in 1978 money. So
Like
that's
$8,000 to $10,000.
whatever. Yeah, it's probably
Yeah.
it's probably 10 grand in today's terms, which is crazy for a 1 megahertz 48K RAM computer with no disk drive. But by the early 90s, the cost of computers was starting to ease its way down. And a lot of what Microsoft did at the time helped with that. They kind of created the clone market, the generic computer market, which helps drive prices down. The online scene was starting to sort of form critical mass. Slowly, but the advent of those things like having access to Sabre for ticketing and
Mm-hmm.
Associated Press, was making feeds available, things like that. So yeah, right in that 92, 93, 94 time, a lot of things all fell together. But yeah, you still didn't see the immense growth until Windows 95 hit, which partially I think that was a matter of software, and that Windows 3.1 and 3.0 were really kind of piles of garbage, as far as being reliable in any sense. And as scary as it is to describe Windows 95 as being reliable and usable, it was really a huge leap ahead of what the Windows environment had been prior to that. And also, Microsoft, by also jumping into the fray at that point with the Microsoft Network, MSN, they helped popularize the concept too. So, you're getting much more exposure to being online, and
They're sort of proving the market with you, yeah.
Exactly. And as I know, because I did listen to your conversation with Jan Brandt, she was doing a lot of amazing things about putting AOL, doing the carpet bombing and just blanketing. You could not turn. You'd go into your own closet and there were AOL discs and you're not even sure where they came from. They just materialized there. It was an absolutely stunning marketing campaign that she ran to make the world aware and get people to put that disc into their computer.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, because obviously at this time, 94, 95, this is also when the web is happening. So again, I'm going to ask you, just from your perspective, but
sure.
The coming of the web to AOL, like if AOL is imagining that it's going to lead this online revolution, and then the web sort of blows up simultaneously, like reading, because I go to the library, I get old articles from 94, 95, like reading interviews with Steve Case from 93 into 94 into 95, like it's almost like his official position evolves from being something like, oh, the web, that's not for normal people. Normal people will never use it. They'll use us. To then, okay, sure, the web is great, but we're going to be offering better stuff over here to eventually, offering people onto the web through AOL. So from your perspective inside the company, what does the coming of the web feel like inside AOL?
I think the way you just described it is pretty accurate, and it is kind of the way it evolved. The early web, there wasn't too much in the way of search facilities yet. We actually ended up buying one of the first search facilities. It was called WebCrawler, Brian Pinkerton's thing. I think that was 94 maybe, that we acquired his company.
Yep, I think so.
Yahoo kind of came up with the kind of more the browse the catalog sort of approach, and there were a few others in that realm, but you had to work at it. It was kind of the reality of it. And again, AOL's philosophy at the time was always centered more around our target audience are non-computer people, non-technical people. They don't want to have to work and tinker in order to use this thing. So AOL provided, a really nice curated set of services. If you want to go find airline tickets, you don't have to think about an URL or searching for it. You just go to our pretty, icon-laden main menu and you click travel. I can understand that. And one of the choices in the resulting menu or resulting form will be, buy airline tickets there. You didn't necessarily have, the choice. If we partnered with Sabre, you got Sabre. If you looked up an encyclopedia article and we were partnered with World Book, you got World Book. But the services we offered were all, they were good quality services. They were in a lot of cases, basically almost every case, we did custom UI over whatever those providers' backends were. So it was a UI that was visually consistent with the whole AOL experience, which, you don't even get that today, right, on the web. You go to one site and it has this user experience, and you go to a different site and the user experience is totally different. You don't even know, is that a button or a link, or is it just static text? It can be very inconsistent because it's decentralized. Whereas we were the exact opposite. Is the term that was always used was the walled garden. I'm sure you've heard that.
Right.
Where it's this beautifully manicured garden. You're safe within these confines. We've vetted all the providers for you. We guarantee if you shop through AOL that you're not going to get ripped off, and if you have any problems, we'll help you resolve it. It was all a very this is probably, I probably shouldn't say this, but like almost like the Disney experience of being online, right? Where everything is just perfect and magical and wonderful, and it was. I think honestly, if you look back on it, we really succeeded in delivering exactly that. Yes, at the same time, the web. Prior to this, what's interesting is before the web, I think a lot of people think, the web was like the start of the internet. It really wasn't. There were a lot of things prior to the web. You had Gopher, you had FTP, you had, Telnet, God help. You had all these other ways of getting information. The web was kind of the first, that was designed to be more, integrated, kind of an integrated experience where you had text and you had media, and it all, you could flow from one to the next in a very cohesive manner.
Right. Well, that's interesting that you say that, because if you think about it, I think I've said on the show before, the web sort of becomes sort of like the GUI for the internet, sort of like the thing that mainstream people it's friendly to, in the same way that you guys are trying to be mainstream friendly. That's sort of what I'm trying to get at is was there a sense within AOL that we've been trying to popularize this online thing, and then now all of a sudden out of nowhere this thing's come along and is doing the same thing? Was there a sense of like the web was a threat or something that we can use?
Initially, I wouldn't say it was. We didn't really see it as a threat, and I think the reason we didn't really see it as a threat was we would look at what the competition was offering, where the competition in a lot of cases was local ISPs. They'd usually just be a local company with a phone bank of 50 phone lines hooked up to a T1 backhaul or something like that, and people would have to know how to configure their PC, how to dial into this number, maybe set up a PPP, connection in their system, and get modem drivers. And then, you've installed the web browser. I don't know where you got the web browser. Maybe the ISP sent it to you on a disk, but you install the web browser, and now you have a web browser. Okay, now what? I'm just looking at a type your URL here thing. And so kind of the at that time, it was a lot of mentality of, this is neat and interesting, and it's kind of nifty technology, but is this really focusing on our core customer base that we're trying to target, which is people who aren't computer people? Or is this just going to be another thing like Gopher, like FTP, like whatever, where, that's nice, that's existed for a while, but you kind of have to be a CS major in order to use it, right? And at that time, it still felt that way. It still felt like to use the web and go through all those machinations, you kind of had to be a CS major. And by the way, there wasn't that much content available at that time either, because just as we had to drag, in some cases kicking and screaming, these content providers to work with AOL, they weren't necessarily in a rush to go and migrate all of their content and all their services to this new thing, right? Because, the web, okay, I heard about it, it's interesting, but you're telling me now I have to, reformat all of my content? That's a big investment. Let's, let's wait and see what happens with it, right? So we already kind of had that head start, so we didn't perceive it as a huge threat, at least at that point. And one of the telling things, we were certainly not the first online service to integrate like web browsing.
Right. I believe Prodigy was.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
But at the time, we kind of looked at it, and again, we kind of wanted to make a really friendly experience. So we had it actually ended up technologically being a significant amount of change, because it's like, okay, well, there's these web bookmarks, so we can probably curate some content around that, and you build a favorites list. But we also wanted AOL content to be on the same playing level. We didn't want it to seem like there were these two disparate things. So we actually ended up creating URL schemes for all of AOL's internal content, so that on any given window, whether it was a web content window or a AOL internal and FDO window, like you could just drag the little favorite place heart into your bookmarks list and it just would work. You know, the user didn't have to know this is a web URL you have to get to in the web browser versus an FDO proprietary content sort of thing. And even subtle details like that actually can take a lot of engineering under the covers to make it all seem organic and to flow right and be really easy to understand.
Well, I want to bring it back to what you're doing. So to get us there, let me ask you, I feel like we're in like the 95, 96 period when AOL, allows its users onto the internet, basically embraces the internet and becomes a de facto ISP. Is there a moment when you realize that AOL is not the scrappy underdog anymore and is getting on board a rocket ship that's going somewhere?
Yeah, the one memory, there were a few kind of points in time where we realized that things were going very quickly. One technological problem that was actually, I think a couple years before, I think it was circa 1994 or so, was there was a technical limitation on the host side of the network, the server side, where, just to give a few words of backstory,
sure.
At any time on the server side of things, when a user made a request from one server to the next, there was this context structure that was passed across the internal network, basically conveying, this is the username, this is their account number, this is their billing info, preferences, flags, just all the sorts of stuff you expect associated with a user or an online state. And this thing got just pushed across the network. Come to find out, long story short, that they did some calculations and said, well, by the time we get to about like 7,400 simultaneous online users, we won't have enough bandwidth. 100% of the network bandwidth will be consumed just moving this context stuff back and forth, just between servers.
7,400 simultaneous. Yeah.
Simultaneous users. And this was like a major crisis in the company. It's like, what the heck are we going to do? The back end at that time was all based on Stratus mini computers, which were designed to be very highly reliable and redundant transactional machines. But they had their own kind of networking, from module to module of those mini computers. And, it was this private network. Fortunately, the host teams at that time were also migrating to Unix. So catastrophe was eventually averted. But that was kind of the first thing, we're growing so fast, we're just completely saturating the backhaul. Only about a year or so later, I think it was Christmas of '95. You can probably find out the details back in stockholder reports or something like that. But we had one day where we signed up 75,000 customers. And you have to remember, this isn't like signing up for Facebook or something where you just give your name and you're done. People were handing over their credit card numbers for this and basically agreeing to be billed, whatever the going rate was at the time. That's a difficult thing to do. Excuse me a second. Sorry.
No problem.
When I joined the company, there were only slightly more than 75,000 customers total from the first, 7-8 years of the company.
Yeah.
And now we're all of a sudden saying in one day there's 75,000 customers who signed up. It was like Christmas Day, right? Everyone had just gotten their new computer or just gotten their modem, and we're signing up to AOL because we were the thing. right? So that was another one of those moments where it's like, wow, this is, as you said, we're not really the underdogs. We're really becoming the leaders at this point. And there were other kind of seminal moments in the history of the company. The movie You've Got Mail. It's like, when there's a movie being made that's kind of sort of about your product and your company, that's a thing. And at that time, I would also, we had a ample supply of clothing from the company, so you'd have plenty of T-shirts and jackets and such labeled with AOL, and I could not go anywhere in public without someone stopping and saying, either I love AOL or, I have this problem. I tried to get online, I couldn't, and it crashed. One way or the other. But everyone was just coming up about it. It's like, this is like a thing.
Let's get into that. Let's get into however much you want to tell me about the America on hold period when you guys go to unlimited usage and the usage explodes.
It does, yeah. Which is, I had talked about it in the context of my own experience, years earlier, where, I didn't really have the money to be going and forking over, $6 or more an hour just to be yakking it up with people on an online service. I'm sure a lot of other people had the same philosophy, and then all of a sudden you say, well, we're not going to be charging by the hour. It's just $20 an hour or a month, excuse me, to get in, and it was a completely radical change throughout the company. Most of my career at AOL was on the client side of things, so I was kind of, thankfully, I guess, I didn't have the direct exposure to dealing with that. With
the back end that would have to deal with this. Intense.
Exactly. The back end, the network team, being able to provision up the partnerships with the dial-up providers to ensure there were enough phone numbers to get into, because that was the thing, right? You would call in and you would just get a busy signal or whatever. And the network and operations teams did an amazing job of actually scaling that up in a fairly short time.
Jan almost, I think she said, it's been a while for me, but I think she said that she almost advised against doing it. Do you remember, were people in the network team, were technical people saying, I don't know that we can do this?
Yes, I definitely heard that. I know, because I actually just listened to your interview with Jan a few days ago. She had mentioned Matt Korn, who was the vice president of operations at that time, and he and I shared an attribute. We were both night owls. We would be in the office at 2, 3, 4 in the morning or whatever, and Matt's like the nicest guy on earth. So even though he was a VP, I would just swing by his office in the evenings, maybe on my way out or whatever. And I'd stop into his office, and every square inch of every wall was a whiteboard and completely covered with notes and plans. And he would just be going a mile a minute, trying to figure out the 10,000 different things that had to be accounted for to make everything work for this transition. And you could tell. I mean, this was a huge and massive risk, really, to the company, both financially and operationally. And even though there was that America on hold period of being the butt of everyone's jokes, I think it was absolutely mandatory for the ongoing success of the company, because if we didn't do it, someone else would have. In fact, others did, obviously, at that point. And there would be, and that coincided, not coincidentally, with the growth, the maturity of the World Wide Web as a viable source.
Right.
All the stuff I had talked about as being kind of like, before, is like, well, that's a lot of hoops to jump through to get your computer connected and online, and then I don't know where to go and all that. It didn't take that long for those problems to fall away, and it become a more viable solution for the average customer to just go with a local ISP and a web browser. So we did not want to lose pace with that.
So through this period that we're talking about, I guess we're into 96, 97,
Yeah.
You're working on the client side still, developing the new iterations of AOL's software.
Yeah, I was actually. I went through a couple of diversions along the way there. Back in '93, I actually created the Newton Mail client for Apple's Newton device.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting, and you know how the Newton story ended up.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't one of the more successful stories actually, but it was interesting to be involved with it. So again, that was kind of an offshoot of AOL's relationship with Apple and the Apple Inc. Personal Edition, thing. And then actually the following year, I was working on a client for a company called General Magic. I don't know if you
Right,
remember them.
yes.
They were a spin-off of Apple
Right.
that produced what they called mobile communicators, which were about the size of a paperback book and really ahead of their time. I mean, kind of functionally, you know,
Well-
if you put it in context of the era, they were smartphones.
Right.
But a
PDAs
smartphone
or
and-
yeah, right, yeah.
yeah, right. They did, I guess, maybe a little better than Newton did. A lot of those, I have so much respect for the people and the technologies involved with those things. I think it was one of those cases where, for those products, the technology and the concepts were ahead of the available hardware in particular.
Or the infrastructure.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I had those diversions, which were interesting. Certainly, getting exposed to what others were in the industry were doing, and then when I came back off of that stint working with those other companies, I was still an AOL employee, just offsite. For about 3 years, about 95 to 98, I was tasked with managing and architecting an SDK product for AOL. So we were actively reaching out to other companies saying, hey, why don't you do a tight integration with AOL? Which served multiple things. It allowed these companies to have a richer experience, and provide a richer experience to the end users. And it also made AOL stickier, to customers who might want to switch. Well, yeah, but then you're giving up this product and this product and this product. In fact, one of the ones perhaps most interesting integrations at that time was Intuit, the company that's kind of known for TurboTax and Quicken. They had a product called Bank Now, which was an AOL exclusive at the time, and as the name implies, it was probably one of the first online banking things. It was a tight integration with the AOL client software, and you could go online and, with a very select number of banks, a couple dozen I think at the time, you could do online banking. And we ensured secure end-to-end connectivity and all that, and it was a very nice integrated experience with with the AOL client. Again, it just very seamless for the non-technical user. Sorry.
Oh, no. Go on. No, go on.
Yeah. So that was what I did through about 98, and then starting around 98 or so in the late 90s, at that point I basically was one of a couple chief architects of the entire client software experience. My key focus at that time was actually on the connectivity infrastructure. So it became very obvious at that point, although at that time we were still basically a dial-up service, or you could use native IP if you had it, from your company or your school or whatever. But it became really obvious that dial-up was not the wave of the future, right? We didn't quite know what the wave of the future was. Was it going to be ISDN? Was it going to be cable? Was it going to be satellites? Who knows? But it became really obvious we needed to get ahead of that wave and make sure that our infrastructure was able to support whatever connectivity infrastructure was coming down the pike. And so that was a lot of my focus, kind of through the late 90s into the early 2000s, which was a really good thing because the timing actually worked out great because, yes, that was starting to get into the era where, yeah, you could actually get cable service from your local provider. But even then, it wasn't clear what form that came in. At that time, AOL was starting to offer AOL branded connectivity, where we would basically buy time on the local cable providers or buy time on the local phone company lines, but it would be AOL branded DSL service or AOL branded cable service.
Right, which is part of the motivation for the Time Warner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, okay,
Yep.
okay. Hold on. Before we get to that, I don't know if you can give perspective on this at all, but something you said earlier about how like there were already status updates or something, or there was already buddy lists. If you can clear up for me, I thought that AOL Instant Messenger (AIM) grew out of the ICQ acquisition. To whatever.
No.
Okay. To whatever extent you can tell me, explain to me how what we know of AIM, the hugely popular product of the late '90s, early 2000s, how that evolved.
AIM was actually an internal effort to completely rebuild from scratch the infrastructure of the service to work on scales of millions and tens of millions of users. The original, like we talked about a little earlier, the original platform around AOL, especially on the backside, were these Stratus mini computers on their own private networks. A few thousand simultaneous users was great. You started getting up in the 7,000-8,000 range. They started choking. There was hacks and workarounds around all that. But there was this realization, well, yeah, this is 1994, 1995. That's all great, but this is going exponential. We can't be talking, to go from 7,000 to 10,000. That's the wrong thinking. We need to be thinking, how do you get 1 million simultaneous users? How do you get 5 million simultaneous users? So AIM actually started as a largely host side, server side, rethinking, rebuilding around Unix-based backends, as opposed to the Stratus proprietary thing that no one knows anything about, with new designs for internal server topography. How do you ensure that servers stay up 24/7, 365? That wasn't a thing in the AOL classic era. Like the service would go down every day at 3 o'clock for 3 hours, just for routine maintenance. That's fine at that time, but if you think about it long term, you don't want people to be deprived, because, by the way, 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern, which is where AOL is based, is only midnight in California. And, when you're suddenly yanking the rug out from people at midnight, they're not going to be happy about that. So it's like, well, how do we develop a whole new infrastructure that allows, servers to be shut down and their contexts all migrated to another server, so we can do a software update or a hardware update on that. It's all of these things related to massive scale and massive uptime. That was really kind of the genesis of what AIM was. And it was this new infrastructure that could be created alongside of AOL. It was from the start an IP-based technology. And instant messaging is a great application. We figured, well, no matter what people are doing with encyclopedias and plane tickets, everyone wants to talk to their friend. So that idea of presence, and I'm not talking about gifts, I'm talking about, being there, being online and being seen, and talking with one another, and the buddy list concept, so you can see who else is hanging out, in your virtual universe with you. Those were all the concepts that were like, okay, this is where we want to start with this new infrastructure that's designed for the internet age, that's designed for the always online age, the the permanently connected age, where the server never goes down as far as the user is concerned, and can scale to essentially infinite numbers of people. So that was the genesis of AIM. We acquired ICQ, I forget, 97 or something like that. AIM had already been in service for a while, and in fact, it was kind of a pain in the neck to integrate ICQ into the platform and allow AIM to ICQ bridging.
Okay, so wait, you bridge ICQ to AIM, but it's not like you bought ICQ for the technology because you already had AIM functioning.
Yeah, I honestly can't tell you. I
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
always wondered why we bought ICQ myself.
Uh,
I think it was just as much as anything for the member base. They were based out of Israel, if I'm remembering it
yeah,
correctly,
yeah, they
and
were.
they had kind of a completely different audience base. Basically, I think there was fairly little overlap of ICQ users with AIM users, and just my guess, and I'm not gonna swear to this or anything, but my guess was it was just trying to just in one fell swoop kind of greatly extend the reach of our audience base.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of always wondered about the ICQ acquisition myself.
Just an aside, your microphone's gotten a little muddy there. I don't know if you.
Oh,
Oh yeah, sorry.
is this any better?
Yes, much better.
Yep. Take a step
Okay.
to the left. Okay.
Yeah. So, but what's interesting? So then, and we'll leave this in a second. We'll go quickly to the Time Warner merger. And please, if I've taken too much of your time, let me know and we can wrap up now. But
Oh no, I'm good.
okay. The thing that's fascinating to me is that the idea that's so central to social, this notion of the social graph,
Yep.
like mapping out your connections, is right there at the root of AOL, where it's just like, well, you would want to know who of your friends were online at the same time you were.
Right.
And so that's the social graph right there in its most basic form. But the issue is it's right there in a world before everyone's online all the time.
Correct, but they were starting to go that way, certainly. And it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, right? You're not going to hang out online if your buddies aren't online. But as more and more people crept online, largely through AOL. AOL gets a lot of it's the butt of a lot of jokes, internet on training wheels or whatever. But the reality of it was, at that time, the vast majority of people who were online anywhere were online through AOL. They may have migrated elsewhere later, but that was the gateway for a lot of people to get online. And so, yeah, building that social model was critical. And what drives me crazy to this day is how many technologies that are now taken for granted that we actually had 20 years ago. Like you and I are talking on Skype right now. It's a nice audio conversation. It's easy. It was about 1995, 1996 or something that I remember seeing a demo using AOL Instant Messaging, where you just click an icon, a little speaker icon or whatever it was, and it just took care of the magic, just like on Skype, and suddenly you were having a voice conversation with someone. That was 20 years ago. Same thing for video. Same thing with profiles, stuff that could easily have turned into Facebook.
Or status updates.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, on AIM to this day, you can set your current status. There's like plugins, and it can be your current music that's playing in iTunes or whatever. You can do that. All these concepts, and we had an amazing amount of technology and an amazing infrastructure, and I think it's a shame that a lot of it kind of got lost for any number of reasons, ranging from just bad timing to not someone deciding not to take the risk to whatever. But
or not putting enough wood behind those arrows or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Well,
yeah.
actually, you made me think of something. I started out this podcast interviewing a lot of the early Netscape guys, and they did. A lot of them say that fighting Microsoft was hard, but being bought by AOL was the worst. So you made me remember that this sense that the tech world, especially on the West Coast, did not necessarily respect AOL. Thought it was internet on training wheels. Did you guys feel that? Did you guys resent that?
That's an interesting. We definitely felt it. I mean, there's no question that we were aware of that perception. All you had to do was go on to almost any Usenet news group in the mid '90s, and it wouldn't take you long to find, someone say, "Oh God, the AOL people are here," as what they thought was their private sacrosanct space was suddenly being invaded by these, thousands and tens of thousands of new people. So yes, we felt that. Did we resent it? I don't know. I can only speak for myself. But I mean, I think I took pride in it in a way. It's like we made something that's actually massively complicated really simple. And it worked clearly because we did have tens of millions of people who use the service every day or every week or whatever. So we accomplished our goal. It's unfortunate that some people considered it to be a negative that we made something difficult easier. You kind of hear the same arguments even today, right? There's whatever, Apple just sold 80 million iPhones in the last quarter or something like that. But, you'll hear certain people from the Android contingent saying, well, the iPhone's crap because, I can't, tinker it and I can't overclock it and flash a new ROM on it like I can on my Android phone, which is all true, but it's serving a purpose that's really good for a lot of people. And, so I think today, and I thought, 20 years ago when we were getting poo-pooed as the internet on training wheels, yeah, okay, maybe this isn't a solution that's right for you, whoever's speaking, but it's a great solution for a lot of people, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I'm thinking that you might not have cared at a certain point because at a certain point it was almost like you guys were the most powerful company in technology. By the way, I'm trying to bring us home here, so don't think I'm settling in for another hour. But so at some point you guys are the biggest and most powerful company in tech. I'm talking about like at the height of the bubble when the bubble's bursting, and so. Again, not from the boardroom perspective, but from, the ground level perspective, when the AOL Time Warner merger is announced, is rumored, happens, whatever, what are you guys thinking? We're going Hollywood, or now we're in the big time? What's happening?
Well, I remember at the time thinking, because if you look at the AOL stock price at that time, it was stupidly high. I mean, we were splitting the stock like every 3 months or something. It was insane. And at some point, you look at it and you're like, this is just funny money. I mean, how are we valued this high all of a sudden? And kind of in my mind, we pretty much at the peak of our stock price, cashed out that stock for real assets. It's like, oh my God, all of a sudden now we have, real magazines, we have real, movies, we have real TV channels, we have all of the stuff that we just paid funny money for, monopoly money for. That's got to be awesome, right? And, I still kind of think to this day in an alternate universe where there weren't, political clashes and company culture clashes and things like that, I think it really could have been absolutely an amazing merger. And clearly that didn't happen, obviously. But I forget what word you just used a minute ago, the bubble bursting or something like that. Something was going to happen, right? We from a purely corporate point of view, the stock couldn't just keep going up and up to infinity. That was going to come crashing down as it did. At that point, the vast majority of AOL's business was still basically being a dial-up ISP.
Right, okay,
and providing content with it. That wasn't going to go forever.
I was going to say, okay, so, again, you're not in the boardroom, but how cognizant are people that, hey, listen, there's this next era coming that's not going to be 56K dial-up.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How you guys you feel like the company was 100% aware of that and was plotting to like get to a lily pad as soon as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, from my technical viewpoint, in the late '90s, I saw, dial up. This is great, and we had a spectacular infrastructure code wise for dial up support. But I'm like, well, this isn't going to last forever, because why would you use dial-up if you can get, a cable connection or a satellite connection or whatever it is? One of these is going to win out. And from a technical point of view, like I started leading, my team on the let's build a new infrastructure that isn't dial-up centric, and it was happening throughout the company. I mean, just going to like broadband changes everything, right? Having richer content just opens up, whole new worlds. But the concern there at that time was, well, yeah, but how are they getting that richer content? Is it through AOL? Well, no, it's probably not, because we're the dial-up provider. I had mentioned, we were doing some partnerships to have AOL branded DSL service or AOL branded cable service. But at that point, we become just an extra layer on top of the company who's actually providing it, right? I mean, Verizon has your phone line, or right. Comcast has your cable line or whatever. Now we're just this extra thing on top. Well, why wouldn't the customer just go with the underlying service?
Even at home had that same problem, and they started out as a broadband company, but like, why do you need at home if you're just Comcast, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of realization about that, but the world was the internet world was changing. I say internet world. It was becoming the internet world, right? I mean, the walled garden that made so much sense in the mid to late '90s made less and less sense. At this point, every computer came with a web browser built in. So that was standardized. Google existed at that point. All the kind of barriers to entry that you had before, one by one, were falling away. And so, I definitely think there was a realization, amongst everyone at AOL that there's a big shift coming. The dial-up walled garden is not going to be king of the hill for much longer. And, then the tough question becomes, well, what do you do about it?
Well, and they tried. It didn't work out. Did you personally? You mentioned like sort of this culture clash, this infighting. Did you personally, as an engineer, as a technical person, experience that in direct ways?
I mostly did not, to be honest, because in that time I was still I was chief architect on the client software. So I dealt with, I dealt with the host side and the operational side of AOL routinely, but I had that extra layer of isolation between myself and, for example, the network team talking with the Time Warner cable team. So I had minimal interactions with that cross company, cross culture chasm. So while I was certainly aware that it wasn't a smooth integration, it didn't really affect me on a day-to-day basis.
Well, in the interest of letting you go, because I've taken so much of your time.
Oh, that's no problem at all.
You stay with AOL through the merger, through AOL going independent again, being spun out. Yes.
Yep.
And through the whole Patch Media thing, buying Huffington Post, TechCrunch. Now it's owned by Verizon. Did you leave after Verizon purchased AOL?
No, I left a little bit before the Verizon acquisition happened. So
okay, well, actually, and I mean this in no negative way whatsoever, but I'm just curious. Why did you stay so long? I think you probably are the longest-serving AOL employee. Why did you choose to stay through all those different regimes and owners and directions?
I loved the company. I loved what we stood for. I loved the people I worked with on a daily basis. Even even, well after it was a, Fortune, whatever, 50 company or whatever we ended up being, we still had a lot of that startup feel. I mean, there were still Nerf gun wars in the hallways and foosball tables and pinball machines and, late night pizza run, all that stuff that is so much fun, and you build really that rapport with your coworkers. It's not just 9 to 5 and you clock out and it's 5 and you forget about it. It was part of our lives. I ended up spending still over half of my life associated with AOL. I met so many great people through the company. It was a great career opportunity for me. I believed in the mission. That mission morphed to a lot of senses. And yeah, I'm not going to tell you I'm as happy about, to a large extent these days, AOL's in the business of selling advertising. There's of course a lot of content creation, like you said. Huffington Post alone is a big content farm, and there's Engadget and TechCrunch and all that. But it feels more like it's just big media company now. So no, it's not the same feeling as it was. But right up to the end, I loved the people I worked with, and I loved what I was doing. And it's always great to work on anything where you're touching in some way, tens or hundreds of millions of people, right? I live in the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan area, where vast majority of the jobs you're going to find in this area are a lot of things in the government or the military, where you're just a cog in a huge machine, and you don't really have the ability to impact lots of people, lots of consumers, real people like you, in some positive way by making their experience a little bit easier, or coming up with some cool new feature that's, people just love to use. That's really exciting for me. I love to be able to have that kind of consumer-facing work that I can do. And, AOL was a fantastic place to do that. And, I don't agree with everything the company did or all the directions that were taken, of course, but I have nothing but the best things to say about my career as a whole there. And, everything I got out of it, and hopefully some of the work I did was positive for people who used it.
Well, actually, I that'll be my final question. I have two more questions.
Okay.
But what you contributed will be my final one. But the second to final one, the penultimate one, people are always shocked to hear that something like 2 million people or whatever are still paying for AOL's dial-up service. I've seen you say this in other places, so I'm going to ask you to repeat yourself. But basically, 2 million people still paying for dial-up. It comes down to what, essentially?
It's probably a combination of things. Some of it, I think, is inertia, where they may not even know they're paying. So many people get their credit card bills, just kind of glance at it. If it's not $10,000 more than they thought it was going to be, it's close enough. They sign the check or whatever. Some people think that if they want to keep their @AOL.com mail address, which they've had for 20 years, and that's how they talk to their kids or whatever, that they have to pay us, which I know the membership teams frequently send out emails like, hey, we see you're coming on a cable connection. You're eligible to switch to the free, free AOL account. Keep your mail service and everything you love about AOL, but you don't have to pay us anymore. And strangely, they just keep this, keep paying for the subscription. The membership team does try to add other value to that. So there's all sorts of ancillary benefits they've done through partnerships. So even the people who don't use dial-up anymore do get value out of the subscription. I know a certain number of people do keep it for travel to weird places. There are certainly in some other countries we still have a pretty massive dial network, and you can go to some boonies place and probably still find a dial-up access number if you want to get online. It'll be slow, but it's more than fine if you just want to send some emails or whatever. Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why I think there's still all those people there.
All right, then I promised. Final question is, um, you described the derisive term training wheels for the internet.
Hmm.
I think I've said on here before. There's another way to look at it, which is it's actually helping people and training people how to live online,
Yeah,
which now 20, 25 years on is more important. And I'm thinking of like what we described as, the proto social and like your social graph and the status updates and things like that. But I'm also talking about like people having an online identity and learning what that means and
hmm,
learning how to do that. So looking back on it, 20, 25 years, however long since you started at AOL, just what you think about the legacy that your work and that AOL in general did in terms of shaping the modern culture and shaping this hybrid online
yeah.
cyber culture that we all have today.
I'm certainly immensely proud of what everyone in that company through that era did. You asked me why I was there so long. One of the reasons, it was an unbelievably fantastic team of people across the board, across all of the technology, across marketing, and up to the executive team. Certainly, Steve Case, you cannot hope to work for a better CEO or a better boss. Um, but I'm immensely proud of what we did. It would be foolish to say that if we hadn't done it, it wouldn't have happened. That's just not a true statement. But like I said a couple minutes ago, like personally, I take a lot of satisfaction out of being able to provide an experience that everyday people care about. And that affects their lives, hopefully in a good way most of the time. Nothing is ever 100% perfect. So you'll have people coming to complain to you that my client crashed or I had a busy signal or whatever. But I think we did something really positive. We were fortunate enough to be the company that for tens of millions of people was the gateway to this thing that we now call the internet. That you know these days people, they'll say, you take anything away, you can take away my TV, you can take away my food, you can take away sex, I don't care, just leave me my internet connection. And it's that much of people's lives today. And I'm really proud that for tens of millions of people we were able to introduce them in generally a really friendly and safe and positive way to all the cool stuff that could happen on this medium. And it's that's really a once in a lifetime opportunity. There's not. I think no one could realistically dispute that the creation, the popularization of the internet is a major event in cultural history. It's just such a game changer for everyone, every industry, every person. And being able to be part of that is just, it's amazing. You look back and you say, I did something really cool. And yeah, I was one piece of this huge, awesome team. But it makes me really proud. I'm proud personally. I'm proud of what AOL did at that time. And like I said before, I take no offense myself in the internet on training wheels, moniker or whatever. That's exactly what we were trying to be. And, everyone who rides a bike pretty much is on training wheels, and that's how you learn how to ride a bike. And that's how we taught people how to be on the internet. It would be awesome if, in the 2000s era, if things had played out a little bit differently, we could have easily been, the Google, the Facebook, the Skype, the PayPal, lots of those other things that we had actually dabbled in. We could have been in all those places, and it didn't work out that way. But I think we were a big and generally positive force on the industry and in the world there. So I look so fondly back on those times, and certainly wouldn't trade it in for anything.
Well, Joe Schober, thank you. First of all, I've said to several people that I feel so remiss that AOL has been so far underrepresented on the show. But so thank you for adding AOL's story to it. But also,
my pleasure.
Basically, thanks for building the training wheels, man.
Thanks a lot. And again, it's quite an honor to be asked to come on. So really appreciate you inviting me.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.